And then we see the plague of the frogs. Look at chapter 8. The first strike was against Hapi and the gods of the Nile, and the second one is against the Nile gods, however, more specifically, against Heket. Now, as we read before, we saw that the frogs swarmed. This was not simply a few frogs in every house, and they were a real darn convenience, and you'd have to clean your registration plate every time you got home because you're always hitting them like you're going country driving in Queensland and it's cane toad season. It's not like that. It's worse. It is frogs, slimy little African frogs everywhere. They swarmed. I'll use the imagery of if you've ever wondered where are all the flies coming from? Where are these maggots crawling from? And then you realize that you missed bin day, and you go out and you realize that the Christmas ham leftovers are in the bottom, and as you open the bag, you simply see a volcano of maggots teeming over, and you gag and you want to run, and maybe that's some of you right now. That's what it was like. Everything they opened is, of course, they stored pots and ovens and things on the ground level, and as they open them, there's just frogs teeming out there. They're everywhere. They are everywhere. Even now, it says, even Pharaoh. Now, this is what Moses threatened him with. The frogs are going to come even upon you, Pharaoh. And later in the account, it says that in fact it was Pharaoh, his servants, the people, every house, every street, and every bed. The god of Heket is now the god under attack. And this was a woman who was pictured with a frog head, usually just pictured as a sculpture of an entire frog. This is their god of Heket. And because these frogs had such an ability to multiply, she was the goddess of fertility. And so that's why God is using frogs in this judgment. But what is funny is that their own sins and idolatries are going to come back to haunt them. Because what happens when you make a god pictured as a frog, that frog, like in Hindu or Buddhist countries that we might be familiar with, becomes sacred and you're not allowed to kill it. Can you imagine living south of the Queensland border and cockroaches became sacred because of your love of state of origin and you weren't allowed to kill them? Or if in Australia, in Queensland rather, if cane toads became holy and you weren't allowed to take a golf swing to them. Not that I ever did, but I've heard of people doing that in their teenage, and you just weren't allowed to put them in the freezer, do anything against them. You have to, here you are, surrounded by your worship. You want to worship frogs, Egypt? Here's your frogs. And I doubt that none of them were killing frogs. No one's that pious. When we were in Nepal, there was guys were telling us about how you're not allowed to eat beef because it's sacred or whatever, but people do eat beef. And you go, well, why and how are you not unclean? Well, it's not that you're not allowed to eat beef, it's that you're not allowed to kill cows. But if they die and you find them, you're allowed to take them home and eat them. And so it is. It's just one of the common mysteries of Nepal that whenever a man is driving on his own without other people looking, cows are always driving across his way. And he's always coming home with some beef. I'm sure it was something like that. I didn't stomp on that frog. I don't know how this happened, but here they are, a protected species teeming through the land. They had no problem with killing Hebrew boys, but they wouldn't kill a frog. And so here they are. They were afraid in Hebrews 1 that the Hebrews would become too many and overflow the land. And here they are. Their own God is now the one with that very problem. But there's irony, because in this section, what we see is that he says in verse 3 that the frogs will even come into your beds. Into your beds. What was the power of Heket? She was the goddess of fertility. They weren't totally magical back in their theology. They still knew there was some human responsibility in the baby-making process. Let's just leave it at that. Heket was not just the goddess of the midwives. She was not just the goddess of fertility in general, but also the goddess of sexual relations that brought about fertility. And now she is everywhere. Do you think any of the Egyptians were being very fertile in their beds, filled to the brim with frogs? This is the irony of God. You worship this thing in this way, have fun, see how you go, making babies with frogs filling your doona mattresses. It's very ironic the way that God attacked them here, but also She was the goddess, as we mentioned, of the midwives. She helped during the childbirth process. Do you remember that, as we mentioned before, the last time there was a fertility crisis that somebody might overtake the land in Egypt, it was the Hebrews. It was the Hebrews who were the fertility crisis, and Pharaoh was afraid they were making too many babies. Now, even back in chapter 1, we've seen evidence that Yahweh is much more powerful than Heket. Because the Egyptians were here having their babies as per normal, and there was the Hebrews, only a few of them at first, now teeming over the land of Goshen. God was able to out-multiply his people more than Heket. That's victory back from chapter 1. They've already acknowledged loss on that front, but now it's this twist of irony where the midwives were weaponized against the Hebrews. Now the midwife God is weaponized against the Egyptians, and they will not multiply. There will be an abrupt drop in the fertility rates or birth rates in about 9 months after this plague. We assure you. And so now here is God putting them to shame as he puts the gods to shame, judging a people along the lines of their idolatry. He judges them according to their sins, and he judges the demons according to their professed powers.